So, Borders was conceived in 2014. I wrote the first draft of the piece in December 2014, and the the context of the poem, which is very obviously about all sorts of different divisions that people create between and amongst each other. Um, it was a commentary. It was supposed to be a commentary on our ideas of very hard and strict boundaries and very hard and strict identities that always will be that are expected to be of a certain kind, and we can't tolerate people who express or inhabit different kinds of personalities, different kinds of cultural identities. Um, what was happening in 2014 was, of course, there were two important events that also formed the reason why I felt the need to write this poem, which was the conflict in Palestine, the conflict in Syria. And it was, I think, between the period of July, August, September, that there were many civilian deaths that happened in both these, in Syria, in Aleppo, areas, that I felt this very strong urge to write what I felt about the world, what I felt about people and their attempts to constantly divide each other and divide land, and our understanding of land and our understanding of ownership, our understanding of belonging. So the poem was birthed out of this idea, this conflict, and this observation and context that was around me. And then, of course, there was the personal experience of identity, the personal experience of being perceived as someone who didn't quite belong here. So I kind of combined both these experiences, both these observations, both these feelings and thoughts into the poem, and that is how Borders started.
There are borders made of tall cement walls, relentless mountains, and wayfaring rivers that have tasted blood. Borders made of armed men, dead, alive, forgotten. Borders made of distorted religions, borders sharp as swords that have cut limbs and breasts and children. Borders that we create everywhere we go, like self-proclaimed universes in comfort zones. We're drawing borders on mind and soul, dropping bombs on ideals. We bemoan raiding people who won't conform until they fear even the sight of a shooting star.
The first two stanzas are trying to establish the idea of a border. The first stanza begins with the more conventional idea of a border, which is tall walls and political boundaries and army and soldiers and guarding these borders. And then it goes slowly into the more metaphorical ideas of borders, which is the differences in opinions, the differences in beliefs, the differences in right and wrong, what is one religion to another religion, to another region, and so on and so forth. And the second stanza more explores the idea of a border in a more abstract sense, but also in a sense that is so relevant and so prevalent, rather, in our lives and in this world. So that was where I began with the idea of a border, And I began with the idea of a traditional, conventional idea and understanding of a border. But what I really wanted to convey with the poem was not so much that conventional idea. I wanted to look at our beliefs and our belief systems and our resistance to accepting other people's truths. So I think that was where I wanted the poem to go. And so you see the transition happening from the first stanza to the second stanza, where I'm talking about ideals, where I'm talking about people air raiding ideals. What was also important for me to establish the idea of a war or the idea of a fight between people or between beliefs of people was to use images and words that came from the context or from the register of war or of conflict, and therefore the use of the words air raid, therefore the use of the words swords and bombs. So there was that context that had to be established, and therefore the images and the metaphors that I reached out to were images that were borrowed from that particular context.
We create borders arguing over truths, unmindful that truth comes from the word tree, and the last time I checked, we had more than one kind, but we aren't kind enough to listen to a story that does not resemble us. Instead, we create borders over and over, like drawing so many lines that look like horizons stacked up one over the other. We are a world that raises walls around it each time a light wants to enter. We're a world that wants the dusk to fall soon, so more bombs can be dropped and some more dreams may be shot.
In the third stanza, there are two things that I wanted to establish. One was the idea, again, continuing from the second, the idea of people trying to create borders, people creating these boxes and these divisions and these boundaries between themselves. And so I use the word truth, and I say in this particular stanza that truth comes from the word tree, and the relation that I was drawing was I was trying to draw from this particular analogy was the fact that we resist or we hesitate to understand and accept other people's truths, and we forget that truth can be of multiple kinds, and by multiple kinds I mean that everybody has their own understanding and their own experiences that define what their truths are and what their beliefs are. And we as people are constantly resisting this idea of the existence or the coexistence of different identities, different beliefs, and different truths. So that was the first analogy. This stanza starts with that analogy and then goes over to the image of a sun and a horizon, which was important for me to establish in this stanza because I come back to it in the last stanza, and I close my poem with this image and the idea of closing ourselves to light, closing ourselves to possibilities. And here light was an analogy or a metaphor rather for possibilities that exist, and possibilities again of different stories and different experiences that we don't allow. And the image of not allowing the sun to enter was, or to create walls to stop from the light to enter, was an idea of creating these borders or these artificial abstract borders around us, where we don't allow possibilities to present before us, where we don't allow perspectives to expand, our perspectives to expand. And that was the third stanza. And from this image, I come back to the idea of a sun and a horizon and what lies beyond it in the last one.
The border between India and Nepal is only a divider, few armed soldiers and a signboard. But in school, no blackboard could subdue the curiosity over my small eyes. My name was instantly replaced by Nepali. that with stone and abuse I had to survive. These borders continue to divide two sides that are no different from each other. If you drop this facade of courage, we'll see our borders are made of fear.
The fourth stanza, I try to illustrate a personal example, a personal experience rather, of what I, as a young girl studying in school, how my identity of having born and brought up in Bombay in India, but having a connection or having parents or having grandparents who were from Nepal, who defined that lineage, or that history defined how I looked and how I looked to people and how I didn't look like I belonged here, that was the example I chose to illustrate in the fourth stanza, where I kind of wanted to convey that people are resistant to other people who don't look like themselves, who don't sound like themselves. And this is again borrowing from the previous stanza, where I say that we are not kind to the stories that don't resemble us. We are constantly looking for similar people and similar ideologies, and we find a lot of comfort in that. But when we discover a story, or a story presents itself before us, which does not sound like ours, an experience or a personality or an identity that does not look like us, a person, a face, a color that does not look like us, and they suddenly becomes the other, that is the first step in which we create these borders between friends, between peers, between our society, our immediate society, our neighboring society, and that thought process, and that culture percolates and spreads itself to how we as a people, as a state, as a country respond to those that look different, that come from different backgrounds and experiences and religion, ideologies, sexual preferences, gender, all of that. So the idea of a border in this particular poem was not simply political, or political idea of a border or political concept of a border, but it meant all these different aspects that we otherwise proudly call as diversity, or our diversity, or our diversity in our society. But when it comes to actually living lives with people who are from diverse backgrounds, we find it difficult, and we find different ways in which we can create conflict, or we create conflict. So this fourth stanza was an example from my own personal experience, which I wanted to put forth in the poem to give. I feel like without this stanza, or without showing a bit of myself and a bit of my own experience, the poem would have become largely a commentary on what's happening around. And I didn't want it to just be a commentary. It had to be something that I had felt and experienced, because it is something that we all have felt and experienced. And in different ways, in different scenarios, because we are all different. Eventually, we may find commonalities amongst ourselves, but we all have different attributes, whether it's habits, or it's where we come from, where we live, and our identities are so complex, that we all have experienced some sort of discrimination, some sort of ill treatment, some sort of creation of border in our everyday lives. So the fourth stanza was an illustration of that personal experience.
Each direction you look, you'll see horizons. It says, this is how far you can see if you stand right here at the same place, but if you move forward, you'll see a little more of what seemed beyond the end of your vision, and you'd know it doesn't look any different than you. Aren't you beyond the horizon with someone else too?
Keep it going for Ankita Shah, guys.
And the last stanza with which I close the image that I bring in the third one of a sun and a horizon was to leave with the thought, or leave the reader or the audience with the idea that there is more than what you see. There is more than what you can see. And sometimes, almost all times, it takes some effort, some willingness to listen to another story, to listen and live with someone else, to be open to someone else who does not resemble us, whose stories does not resemble us. It takes some willingness and some effort and some bit of stepping forward, stepping closer to that person, to see that they're finally not that different, that we are all finally human, and that we all go through the same emotions, no matter how varied our experiences are, no matter how varied our upbringing is. So I closed the poem with this particular idea that we need to be open, we need to be empathetic to other people, to everybody else around us. And the idea that I wanted to reinforce was that the horizon, as it looked to me, or as it looks to one person, there's more to it beyond that horizon. Just as someone who's at the other end of the horizon cannot see me, I will not be able to see that person entirely, and both of us need to step closer to each other and to find that we both don't look any different. That I am also someone who may come across as different, but I am not, and the other way around. So the idea of the entire poem, or the idea of Borders, was to put some light on the idea of different differences that we imagine that exist, but to also help ourselves to bring those borders down, to bring those boundaries and those walls down, by being a little more empathetic, by being kind, by being open to each other.
Hey guys, hi.
Hi, thank you for watching. This was Scratchpad Session. Make sure to like, share, subscribe to YsoHarsh.
Thank you.